This video is over Chapter 10, Vocabulary Terms, Part 3. Let us begin with number 22, Langston Hughes. He was born in Missouri, and Hughes became one of America's greatest poets, and he is arguably the greatest African-American poet of his generation, possibly of all time. He is part of that Harlem Renaissance we spoke about in the previous video. Marcus Garvey, another African-American who became well known for his Back to Africa movement. The idea was Marcus Garvey, who was born in Jamaica, came to the United States, became a political activist, and his controversial career, his career was very controversial, was essentially or eventually arrested and deported because of fraudulent activities. He started a Back to Africa movement. He started his own cruise ship line, the Black Star, and he essentially stole money from it, which is what got him deported. But he was one of those early African American leaders who wanted to isolate the African Americans from the rest of the country, therefore the Back to Africa movement. And he was controversial because he made statements, suggestions that blacks only do business with blacks, that blacks avoid white-owned businesses, those types of things. The segregationist movement, started by the black activists like Marcus Garvey, created a great deal of controversy, and his cause lost a lot of political power when he was discovered to be a fraud and was deported. Number 24, Charles Lindbergh, the first person to fly nonstop solo, and this is not added, nonstop solo across the Atlantic. And this is in 1927. He became not only an American hero, but an international hero. So he, in his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, took off from the American East Coast, flew across the Atlantic by himself, nonstop, landing in France. This bit of heroics, this step forward for aviation, again, made him an international hero, to the point when, after he marries and has a child in a few years, his child is kidnapped. The Lindbergh case, as it became known, was followed by Americans all over the country. It was followed internationally. And when the baby was found murdered, the entire nation mourned with Charles Lindbergh and his wife at the loss of their child. So even to this day, Lindbergh's name is mentioned with reverence because, again, of what he accomplished. Now, flying nonstop across the Atlantic these days by yourself is not that big a deal, but we're looking at a vastly different period of time, vastly different circumstances than today. Number 25, isolationism. This is something we have discussed in several chapters. Refusing to become involved in foreign nations' disputes. That is the definition in this particular chapter. Again, isolationism is really simple: to not become involved with other nations, whether it is part of a dispute like a military dispute or a trade dispute. I don't think it really matters. But generally we think of isolation and isolationism. We think of staying uninvolved or not becoming involved in military matters. Not necessarily trade, but mostly military matters. Number 26, recession. This is a downturn, a slowing of the economy. And it is signaled by higher inflation, inflation being the rise in the cost of goods. Employment goes down. Jobs are difficult to find. There are a couple of others, but again, that's a recession. And recessions can be fairly serious, or they can be relatively mild, depending on any number of factors. But we're looking at prices being higher, jobs being more scarce. Number 27, the Palmer raids. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, he was the Attorney General of the United States of America, started these raids because of a number of bombings, a number of mail bombs that were mailed out, including to himself, to round up suspected radicals. He appointed J. Edgar Hoover the head of the newly created FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and it was Hoover who headed the Palmer raids. Now, the idea was to round up people who were believed to be attempting to overthrow the government, radicals trying to overthrow the government. Over 4,000 were arrested, with 600 being deported. So, Mitchell Palmer, who was the Attorney General, picked J. Edgar Hoover to lead a brand new government agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. The idea behind the Palmer raids was to round up suspected terrorists, suspected anarchists, suspected radicals, and 4,000 plus were arrested. 600 of them were deported. This was after a series of bombings, including one aimed at Mitchell Palmer's home, a number of bombings which did injure a number of people and caused a lot of damage. This is nothing new, again, for the last several years of the period of time we're looking at, because of the Red Scare, because of the fear of anarchists and radicals, communists from Eastern European countries, from Russia. There was a fear that these individuals would attempt to destroy America, and this is one of the actions taken to stop that. All right, let us move to the next slide, number 29. Sacco and Vanzetti. These two individuals right here, and here are their full names. Those two individuals right there, Sacco and Vanzetti, were arrested, tried, and convicted, and executed for murder in a botched robbery. Now, a little bit of background. These two men were relatively recent Italian immigrants who were quite radical. They were anarchists. They didn't really believe in government, which of course goes against what we believe as stated in the Declaration and the Constitution. After they were arrested, tried, convicted, and executed for murder, many people believed that the pair was innocent and thought that they were executed due to their political views, their political beliefs. Now, whether this is true or not, I have no idea. I'm not going to lie to you. I have no clue. Were they arrested because they were recent immigrants? Were they tried, convicted, and executed because of their political views? I don't know. Many people believe that they were executed for their political beliefs, their political views, anarchy. I don't know. But if they were tried, convicted, and executed for the political views, they were a pair of victims of the Red Scare because of the growing concern for foreigners, which takes us to number 30, nativism, a dislike of foreigners. Why? Because, again, many of them associated foreigners, Sacco and Vanzetti, for example, to be dangerous, to be anti-American. And so nativism, which is nothing new. We've had people who were nativists for many, many years. You can go back to the Chinese Exclusion Act of the 1880s, for example. You can go back even further than that, but that's one that we covered not too long ago. Most of the other ones are laws that were covered in years that we do not cover in this particular year, in this particular book. But that one is one that we have discussed. Nativism was quite strong at that period of time. The Chinese Exclusion Act limited the number of Chinese who can come into America. Why? A distrust, a dislike of foreigners, a fear of them taking our jobs, corrupting America, attempting to overthrow America. Now, again, the Chinese were not attempting to overthrow America, but people like Sacco and Vanzetti, they were trying to overthrow, to change America, fundamentally change America. And so many people today believe that that's why they were executed, because of their political views. Well, let's go to number 31, the Klan, the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. Oh, God, they suck. Some of the biggest scum you'll find collectively. Found generally in the South, and this S should be capitalized, okay? This group was founded toward the end of the Civil War, right after the Civil War ended. It was founded by members of the Democrat Party, members of the Confederacy, Southerners who believed that blacks were inferior and therefore they believed in the superiority of whites. For a number of years, the Klan ran roughshod over blacks and supporters of blacks and the rights of the blacks, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, for example, lynching, murdering by hanging, beating, and other forms of intimidation to force them to do what the Klan wanted. Now, due to the rise of the fear of communism, the Red Scare in the 1920s, the Klan, sadly, rose as well. Why? Because the Klan preached American values, preached Christianity, preached white superiority. Now, again, this is garbage. There really is no such thing as a genetically superior race or ethnic group. That's just stupid. But many people found that their views, their religious views, their political views were being challenged by people like Sacco and Vanzetti, by the Scopes Monkey trial, and others that we will discuss. And so therefore, they reached out to someone and say, hey, I understand your pain. I understand what you're feeling. Join us and we will protect you. We, the Klan, will protect the white race here in America from the evil minorities who are coming to destroy America. Now, in some cases, there were people who were coming to America to destroy us. But they were, by and large, white. I mean, Sacco and Vanzetti were Italian. They are Caucasian. The Russian anarchists, the Russian communists, the Russian socialists, they were Caucasian. They were not coming from Africa. They were not coming from China to overthrow us. They were coming from European countries where millions of Americans' ancestors had come from. So the Klan, generally found in the South, and you will find a few in the North, again, started around the end of the Civil War, started by the Democrat Party. And the Klan is the party, the Democrat Party is the party of the Klan. Up until relatively recently. Today, generally speaking, if you're a Southern Democrat, then you're a racist. We talked about in class the other day, Woodrow Wilson, Democrat president, third progressive president, first Democrat progressive president during World War I. He was a racist. All Democrats from the South were, and many of the Northern Democrats were racist in the 19-teens, 1920s. It's just the way it was. And so the Democrat Party, which dominated the South from about 1877, when the Reconstruction period ends, when this book begins, up until relatively recently, in fact, in some parts of the South, like the Rio Grande Valley, Democrats still dominate. That is where you find the Klan. Okay, let's go to number 32, the Washington Naval Conference. This is an international summit, which is sponsored by the United States. President Warren G. Harding, proposed and supported the reduction of arms. Arms, of course, being weapons. So the Washington Naval Conference was an attempt to bring about an international consensus, a consensus amongst the industrial powers of the time, the United States, England, France, Russia, for example, to bring about a reduction of arms to eliminate the possibility of another world war or another conflict that would then develop into a world war, just as we had seen recently. The World Court. And it is still around to this day in one form or another. This was an attempt to bring the nations together. Again, I don't know why there's an apostrophe S there. There really shouldn't. Sorry about that. I guess I did not proofread this enough when I copied and pasted it. I'm sorry. Anyway, attempt to bring nations together in order to solve legal disputes, and it is still around to this day. I don't think it's overly effective, personally, but let us say that there is, again, a trade dispute, a boundary dispute, an American citizen commits a crime in France and then comes back to America. Then France could go to the World Court and attempt to have that individual extradited to France to stand trial, to face the charges that he is accused of. Again, it sounds like it has some merit, and it probably did have some value, and maybe still does to this day. Unfortunately, today, a lot you hear about the World Court is about charging American generals and American presidents like George W. Bush with war crimes. I don't really think that is a bright idea or a good idea, but that is kind of what you hear mostly about the World Court or from the World Court today. But again, the general idea was to have an international gathering. Okay, nations would band together, and there would be really essentially a court, and this would attempt to solve legal problems, again, before they become somewhat violent. And then finally, our last one on this page, the Model T. Introduced in 1905, this was a Ford, and this was the most popular car, maybe of all time. But Henry Ford in the 1920s made millions of them. It was the first mass-produced car, and it definitely was the most popular car of the time. And in 1924, you could buy a brand new Model T, top of the line, the best car probably made in the world, for $300. This is due to the Ford plants in mass producing these cars using the techniques that we described and we discussed in the previous video. Let's move on to our next slide, and this will be the last slide we will cover in this video. We'll finish up the vocabulary terms in a fourth video. Number 35, Glenn Curtiss. In 1908, he introduced the world's first seaplane capable of taking off and landing. No, taking off is not mentioned here, but landing on land as well as water. I'm sure you've seen pictures, movies of seaplanes that can do this. They have attached to the wheels or around the wheels pontoons, which allows them to land on water, and then there are the wheels that stick out a little bit below the pontoon so they can take off and land on land. So Glenn Curtiss is well revered, well remembered in the aviation community because of his contributions with the seaplane. Now again, this creates all kinds of possibilities that did not exist before. You can land on any body of water that gave you enough space to take off and land from. You need a certain amount of space to land, because once you make contact with the water, you got to slow down, and it may take a few hundred yards to do so. And it has to be significantly sized. I mean, it's not like you can take off and land in an irrigation ditch or a canal. But again, it allowed us to get to areas where we had not been able to get to before using planes because of a lack of a landing field. And so now using a lake, a river, even the ocean, allowed us to get to and from these places, which of course has all kinds of possibilities. Number 36, the assembly line. I mentioned this previously. I'm going to go into a little more detail right now. Henry Ford used the first electric conveyor belts, which would take the product from station to station. Again, with Henry Ford, we're talking about automobiles, but this could be used in pretty much any good, any item. And so the car would be taken from station to station, as opposed to me, the worker, going from car to car. The car would come to me, and I would then do what I do. Maybe I install the seat belt on the steering wheel, or I put on the tires, or I put in the back seat or the windshield. It doesn't really matter what my job is. But the car comes to me on a conveyor belt. It stops at my station, and there is a distance between my station and the next guy's station. And it comes from the first guy's station, it comes to my station, then goes to a third station. Once it gets to my station, the conveyor belt stops, and then I do my job on my car. The first station does its job. That car comes to me, I do my job. It goes to the next station, that guy does his job. And because of the fact that we are doing the same thing again and again and again, we get very good at it. We get very fast at it. And the faster you can produce these cars, the cheaper you can sell them for, which then allows us to sell brand new Model Ts, the most popular car of the day, for $300. So the assembly line, interchangeable parts, division of labor, this all allowed Ford and then others after him to produce in large quantities goods, well-made goods that can be sold for very low prices. Now, what you could not afford to buy with cash, you can now start to buy on credit. This is something that really got started in the 1920s and spread quite a bit. The buyer, again, let's just say I want to buy a car. I would make a small down payment. And let's just say, again, we're going to look at a Model T, 1924, $300. And so I make a small down payment, and just go with $30, 10%. So I make a small down payment on a good, in this case, a car, and then I'll pay off the rest in monthly installments. This spread to all areas where you can now buy a car, making monthly payments. You can now buy a refrigerator, a washing machine, a vacuum cleaner, and all of, and there's so many, all of the labor-saving, time-saving, entertainment inventions that popped up in the late 19-teens and the 1920s, and all the way through today. Pretty much any big-ticket item that you buy today, you're going to buy on credit. You want to buy a car, you go to Ford, you go to Chrysler, whatever car company you're going to buy it from. You sit down, you're going to buy it for $20,000, you give a down payment, and you drive away and you pay monthly until the value of the car, and interest of course, is paid off. And that's how we buy pretty much all big ticket items: cars, refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, any and all things. Number 38, speculation. This takes us, of course, to one of the reasons why the stock market collapsed. It is the purchase of an item not for personal use. And this is the key here. Not for personal use, but with the hope of selling it at a higher price. And so here I am. I buy a car. Okay. I buy a used car, I fix it up a little bit, I never intend to use it, I intend to sell it at a higher price. So I buy a car, I fix it up, maybe put new tires on it, whatever the case may be, and I turn around and sell it. There's all kinds of shows on TV about flipping houses, flip this house, or love it or leave it. Any number of shows that I'm sure some of you have seen where people will buy a home. They'll spend a few thousand, 10,000, depending on whatever needs to be done. They'll fix the home up and they'll turn around and sell it at a profit. So I buy a house for $100,000. I spend $30,000 fixing it up, painting it, replacing the roof, putting in a new porch, landscape it, whatever. And so I paid $100,000 for it. I spent, again, let's use the number $50,000 to fix it up. That's $150,000 that I put into it. I sell it for $200,000. I make $50,000 profit. Now, where we get into problems, where we get to have a problem with speculation, is the fact that this was done with the stock market. I buy a stock, I hold on to it for a short time, waiting for the stock to go in value, then I sell it, making a profit. Now, that in and of itself is not a bad idea, and millions of people have done that and been very successful. The problem is that I often borrow the money for the initial purchase. That's called buying on margin. We'll get to that later. So I borrow money from a bank, let's say $10,000. I buy $10,000 worth of stock. I never really intend to keep it. I wait till the price goes up $1 or so. I turn around and sell it. Boom, I made $4,000 or $5,000 profit. I pay back the bank. What I have left over is pure profit. That's speculation, and that's what helps lead to the crash of the stock market, which we'll get to a little bit later on. We got two more, and we'll finish up this video. William Jennings Bryan, we have discussed him numerous times. In fact, I mentioned him the last video, talking about the Scopes monkey trial. He was the special prosecutor. He volunteered to prosecute William Scopes. Scopes was arrested for breaking Tennessee law. He taught evolution. That was against the law in Tennessee at the time. By the way, we're still having that debate today. Evolutionism versus creationism. We're still having that debate. Anyway, Clarence Darrow defended Scopes. William Jennings Bryan prosecuted Scopes. The trial ended with Scopes being found guilty, fined a minimal amount, $100, I believe. He never paid it, and the verdict was overturned a year or so later. The trial itself, the Scopes monkey trial, was not so much about John T. Scopes, because no one cares about him. It was, again, evolutionism versus creationism. That's what the trial became about. William Jennings Bryan was a four-time presidential candidate. He was a member of Congress. He had been Attorney General under Woodrow Wilson for a period of time. I'm sorry, not Attorney General, forgive me, Secretary of State. And he had a long, distinguished career. He was also one of the leading authorities on the Bible. He had committed large amounts of the Bible to memory. And so as the prosecutor, he was fighting on, in his mind, the side of Christianity. Clarence Darrow was fighting on the side of evolutionism. And finally, our last one for this video, Charles Davenport, a proponent, a person who favors eugenics, and we talked about eugenics in the last video. He thought that by preventing mentally ill people from having children, it would prevent mental illness from ever occurring again. I don't think that's really how it works. In fact, I know it's not how it works. Now, in horses, in dogs, and in most animals, you can breed bigger, stronger, faster, richer, prettier, won't forget richer, but prettier animals. Theoretically, it works in humans. You have a 6'5" man who marries a 6'3" woman, more than likely they're going to have taller children. That's just the way genetics works. The dominant gene wins out. Now, of course, you have to redheaded people marry. Are they guaranteed to have a redheaded child? No, not guaranteed. The odds are very much in their favor. So the concept of eugenics, again, as a part of the definition, the previous video, it's sort of a pseudoscience, kind of a science that basically thought that you could improve the human race through selective breeding. In this case, Charles Davenport wants certain people, the mentally ill, not to breed, to not have children, and he felt that that would then prevent mental illness from occurring in the future. And of course, that's just not the way it works. Okay, this is going to finish up our look at the third part of this. Again, this is the, wrong one. This is the Chapter 10, Vocabulary, and this was our Part 3. We will finish up the vocabulary terms with Part 4, but for now we're done. Bye.